The story of the Tower of Babel is not just a story of bricks and mortar, but a tale loaded with meaning that echoes through the centuries. Imagine a world fresh from the flood, where humanity is trying to rebuild itself and find a sense of collective identity. Everyone spoke the same language, shared the same customs, and was united by a common purpose. This scenario could be ideal for progress and collaboration, but soon this unity turned into something dangerous: the emergence of an ambition that sought to challenge the limits imposed by God. In the book of Genesis 11, we find men deciding to build a great city, whose main feature would be a tower that would reach the heavens. This was not just a demonstration of architectural skill or a desire for progress. The real reason was deeper: to build a monument that would show that humanity could be self-sufficient, independent of God and his plans. The first layer of this narrative is the human quest for greatness. But there is something more to it: the desire for control and centralization of power. The leaders of this enterprise were not just building a building. They were building a system where the few dominated the many, using the tower as a symbol of unification and absolute power. The decision not to spread across the earth, contrary to God's mandate, reveals an ancient human desire to avoid the unknown and establish an illusory comfort. Now imagine the construction scenario: tireless workers, transporting bricks and mortar under the scorching sun, driven by promises of glory and immortality. Each brick that was placed in the tower represented a step closer to the ultimate goal: we will make a name for ourselves. This phrase, taken directly from the biblical text, is the center of the entire story. But what was the price to pay for this ambition? This grandiose project was not just about technological advancement, it was about ego and self-sufficiency. A universal lesson emerges here: the pursuit of unbridled greatness often disconnects us from our spiritual roots and sets us on a path of destruction. It is important to reflect: what are the limits of human ambition? Is the quest to overcome barriers always a positive thing? Modern studies in psychology and sociology reveal that ambition, when not balanced by humility and empathy, can lead to exploitation, inequality, and social collapse. To give the tale of Babel a modern twist, consider today's mega-constructions: skyscrapers that defy the clouds, grandiose projects that often hide questionable intentions, such as controlling resources or demonstrating a nation's power. Even today, we face the dilemmas that Babel illustrates. Human ambition knows no bounds, and its consequences can be devastating. However, Babel is also a warning about the need for balance. Throughout history, societies that have achieved greatness without respecting ethical or divine limits have ended up meeting their downfall. Whether through the fall of ancient empires or the modern climate crisis, the message is clear: we cannot build towers to the heavens without first ensuring that our foundations are established in morality and justice. When we analyze the narrative of the Tower of Babel, we realize that human pride is at the center of events. This feeling, often seen as a virtue in the modern world, is described in the Bible as the root of great faults. In Babel, pride led men to ignore divine mandates and seek self-sufficiency, a theme that is repeated throughout human history. Since creation, God had given humanity a clear order: be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. This instruction was not only about reproduction, but also about expansion, discovery, and living in the most diverse territories. However, the inhabitants of Babel chose to defy this order. By deciding to remain in one place and build a tower that symbolized their greatness, they rebelled against the limits set by the Creator. This act of rebellion was not only physical, but also spiritual. The tower was an attempt to touch the heavens, to invade a space that did not belong to them. It was a symbol of human arrogance, which believes it can conquer everything, including that which is divine. Now imagine the scene. The construction of the tower was not just an architectural project, it was a social and cultural event. Men and women, of different skills and professions, came together to create something unique. But behind this apparent unity was a dark purpose: to show that they did not need God. This attitude resonates to this day. How many times has humanity tried, in its arrogance, to ignore natural or spiritual limits, only to discover that these barriers exist for a reason? The consequences of excessive pride are clear: divisions, conflicts, and failures. However, there is something interesting about the divine intervention at Babel. God did not destroy the tower with a violent act. He did not send a flood or fire from heaven. Instead, he confused the languages, making communication impossible. This gesture, at once subtle and powerful, disrupted the entire project. The unity that was the basis of the construction was undone. This part of the story brings up an important reflection. Communication is essential to any human project. Without it, even the greatest undertakings are doomed to failure. And in Babel, God used exactly this to show that, no matter how hard man tries, he will never be able to overcome the limits set by his Creator. By bringing this narrative to the present, we can make several connections. We live in an era of technological and scientific advances, where man constantly seeks to touch the heavens, whether by exploring space, mastering artificial intelligence, or breaking ethical barriers in the name of progress. But the story of Babel teaches us that all this search must be guided by humility and an awareness of our limits. In the end, what remains is the lesson that human pride is often its own downfall. When we try to be self-sufficient, ignoring our connection to the divine, we end up creating chaos and division. Just as in Babel, God does not need to use force to show us our limits. He uses human nature itself, its fragility and dependence, to remind us that we are creatures, not creator. The story of Babel, with its famous confusion of languages, is one of the most intriguing and multifaceted narratives in the Bible. When approaching this episode, it is important that we consider the theological, cultural, and philosophical depth that it brings, not only to the biblical context, but also to the reflection on human nature and its consequences in contemporary society. Before the confusion of languages, all human beings spoke a single language. Communication between people was perfect, fluid, without obstacles. Imagine a scenario in which all humanity, in its entirety, shared the same way of expressing itself. A place where ideas were exchanged easily, where the most ambitious projects could be carried out without friction, without misunderstandings. The unity of language symbolized the unity of humanity. Everyone, in their diversity, could work together to achieve any goal. And then the confusion of languages occurs, and harmony is broken. Suddenly, what was once a collective effort to build something great, the Tower of Babel, turns into absolute chaos. Imagine the scene: workers on different floors of the tower, shouting instructions to each other, but these instructions are no longer understood. A simple request, such as pass the brick, is now met with blank stares, meaningless gestures, a total disconnect. A project that was once a great work of collaboration is now paralyzed by a failure of communication. The confusion of languages, in this sense, is not just a linguistic phenomenon, but a reflection of the complexities of the human condition. It symbolizes the fragmentation of ideas, the difficulty of communication between different peoples and cultures, something that is reflected to this day. We live in a globalized world where communication has never been easier, but paradoxically, cultural, ideological, and linguistic barriers seem increasingly difficult to overcome. Different languages can be seen as metaphors for the social, political, and cultural divisions that exist between us. Now the crucial question arises: why did God choose to confuse the languages rather than simply destroy the tower, or even humanity? God's choice to act in this way is deeply symbolic and has multiple layers of meaning. Some scholars and theologians suggest that the confusion of the languages was a reminder of God's absolute power, which required no direct destruction but only a subtle and effective intervention to alter the course of things. By confusing the languages, God did not physically destroy the tower, but rather prevented humanity from continuing to build with the same unity and effectiveness. The construction of the tower, once intended to reach the heavens, now became a symbol of human limitation, of our inability to transcend certain limits imposed by the divine nature. Other theologians argue that the confusion of the languages was an act of mercy. Humanity, in its unbridled pursuit of greatness, was in danger of self-destruction. The Tower of Babel, with its ambition to reach the heavens, could be seen as a reflection of human pride, of the desire to achieve absolute power, to place oneself on the same level as God. To prevent humanity from falling into this trap, God intervened to disperse people and prevent them from uniting for an even more destructive purpose. The confusion of languages was thus a divine break on our own tendency to overstep boundaries in the name of conquest. Furthermore, this event marks the beginning of the linguistic and cultural diversity that characterizes the world to this day. Each language carries with it a history, a culture, a unique way of perceiving the world. The linguistic diversity that began at Babel is one of the most striking characteristics of human civilization. Language, after all, is not only a tool for communication, but also a way of constructing identity. When languages were confused, human communities were fragmented, and with this fragmentation, new cultures, new ways of living, new perspectives on the world were born. The confusion of languages can also be seen as a reflection of the difficulties we face in communication today. In an increasingly connected world, we are faced with the complexity of global communication, where languages intertwine but also drift apart. Linguistic diversity can be seen as a symbol of our difficulty in understanding each other, in achieving true unity amidst the multiplicity of perspectives and realities. In many situations, our words and actions are interpreted in different ways, and what seemed like a simple exchange of information turns into an enigma. The story of Babel also offers a powerful metaphor for reflecting on the barriers to communication in our personal lives. How often, in our relationships, do we feel that we are not being understood? How often is what we say misinterpreted, or what we are trying to express lost in the gaps of language? The confusion of languages, then, is a reminder of the importance of clear communication, but also of the humility of recognizing our limitations in trying to express ourselves. On a deeper analysis, we can ask, to what extent does the confusion of languages not also reflect the complexity of human relationships on a more philosophical level? When people divide themselves, whether for political, cultural, social, or religious reasons, they create their own languages, that is, their own systems of beliefs and interpretations. The modern world is a reflection of this, where different groups speak, but do not always understand each other. The story of Babel, then, leads us to question how we can overcome these barriers and find ways to communicate, to truly connect, without the confusion of languages becoming an insurmountable wall. The confusion of languages also teaches us that true unity does not lie in homogenization, but in the acceptance and understanding of differences. Humanity, when fragmented into different cultures and languages, also found ways to reinvent itself, to grow and to evolve. Perhaps the lesson of Babel is precisely this, that diversity, although challenging, is also a source of wealth and potential. When we are able to listen to and understand the language of others, we can build bridges, instead of towers. Bridges that, unlike the tower, do not seek to rise in an act of arrogance, but rather to bring us closer to each other, in an effort to genuinely connect. Therefore, the story of Babel is not only a story of dispersion and chaos. It is also a story of redemption and learning. It teaches us that true greatness does not lie in reaching the heavens, but in learning to communicate with humility, in recognizing the limits imposed by our nature, and in respecting the differences that make the world a more complex but also more beautiful place. If today, in the modern world, we are confronted by many towers, whether in our desire for power, in our pursuit of material conquests, or in our own egos, the story of Babel continues to remind us that without humility and understanding, these towers will eventually crumble. And what remains after the collapse is a chance for reconstruction. But this time, instead of building a tower, we can try to build bridges that connect and bring together all the languages that exist between us. The confusion of languages, although it was an event of great impact and mystery, is also an invitation to reflect on how we deal with differences and how we can use these differences to promote unity, not division. The Tower of Babel is one of the most enigmatic and debated narratives in the Bible. Its significance transcends the realm of theology and raises a great many questions. Where exactly was the tower built? Did it really exist? How big was it? Why, beyond the confusion of languages, does the story of the tower continue to arouse such fascination? By exploring the theories and speculations about the Tower of Babel, we can not only better understand its biblical context, but also the complex relationships between faith, science, and history. First, the location of the Tower of Babel has been a point of intense debate among archaeologists, historians, and biblical scholars. Traditionally, many believe that Babel was located in ancient Mesopotamia, in the region that today corresponds to modern-day Iraq. The Bible, in Genesis 11, refers to the city of Babel as being the center of a great empire, and many believe that the tower was built in a city that existed on the banks of the Euphrates River, in a territory that was historically one of the cradles of civilization. The city of Babylon, famous for its grandeur and wealth, is often associated with Babel. However, doubts remain about the exact location of the Tower of Babel. Since there is no direct archaeological evidence to prove the existence of a structure like the one described in the Bible, some scholars suggest that the city of Babylon could be the basis of the story, since its ziggurats, huge pyramidal temples with steps, may have served as inspiration for the construction of the tower. These towers were built to bring the gods closer to heaven, and their grandeur symbolized the power of an empire. The Tower of Babel, if it really existed, would have followed this architectural pattern, but with an even more ambitious purpose, to reach the heavens and thus challenge God. Regarding the size of the tower, there is a great deal of speculation. The biblical description of a tower that reached to the heavens leaves room for both literal and figurative interpretations. For some, this suggests a gigantic structure, perhaps one of the largest constructions of its time. But if we take this description more symbolically, the tower that reached to the heavens can be seen as a metaphor for human ambition to achieve something that is beyond the limits imposed by nature. The size of the tower, then, may not be so much a question of actual measurements, but rather an attempt to attain unattainable grandeur and power. Among the archaeological theories about the Tower of Babel, many believe that the tower could be a ziggurat, a type of religious structure common in Mesopotamia, designed to connect with the gods. The most famous ziggurat in the region was the Ziggurat of Ur, which was located in southern Mesopotamia and dates back to around 2100 BC. Although the Ziggurat of Ur was not the Tower of Babel, it shares characteristics with the structure described in the Bible. The construction of ziggurats had a clear religious purpose, being a symbol of the human search for transcendence and contact with the divine. The Tower of Babel, seen from this perspective, could represent not only a human effort to reach the heavens but also a reflection of a desire for power, control, and dominion over the cosmos. There are also theories that question the literal existence of the tower and treat the event as an allegory. Some interpretations suggest that the story of Babel can be seen as a myth that symbolically explains the origin of languages and cultures, rather than as a historical or archaeological account. In this context, the tower would represent the human attempt to place itself on the same level as the gods, a metaphor for the dangers of pride and excessive ambition. The confusion of languages, then, would be a way of illustrating the difficulty of communication between different peoples, a natural consequence of our attempt to go beyond the limits established by God. In addition to archaeological and historical issues, the Tower of Babel also sparks debate about its profound philosophical and theological meaning. What really motivated the construction of the tower? The Bible tells us that men built the tower with the intention of reaching the heavens and making a name for themselves. This ambition for self-sufficiency and grandeur is a recurring theme in Scripture, representing the human attempt to separate itself from God and place itself at the center of the universe. The tower, then, can be seen as a symbol of the attempt to overcome the limitations imposed by creation and to achieve a status of power and control that, according to the biblical view, belongs only to God. This theological reading leads to a reflection on the dangers of self-sufficiency and human arrogance. The attempt to build something that challenges the divine order is a reflection of our tendency to believe that we are capable of controlling everything around us, even that which is beyond our comprehension. The story of Babel, then, is a warning against pride and a reminder that when we try to put ourselves in God's place, the consequences can be disastrous. Furthermore, the theory that Babel represents an explanation for the diversity of human languages and cultures is one of the most fascinating. The Bible not only tells the story of the origin of diverse languages, but also the origin of the cultural diversity that characterizes humanity. The confusion of languages, as human beings scattered throughout the world, resulted in a plurality of cultures and ways of life. This raises an interesting question: is human diversity, in fact, a consequence of sin and the attempt to defy God? Or is it a way for God to allow humanity to experience the freedom and complexity of creation in a richer and more diverse way? Many contemporary theological schools suggest that cultural and linguistic diversity can be seen as part of the divine plan, a way of reflecting the beauty of creation and the multiplicity of forms that humanity can adopt over time. Rather than being a punishment, diversity can be seen as an opportunity for humanity to learn to relate to differences, to respect and understand others, rather than trying to force homogeneity. The Tower of Babel, then, is not just a historical event, but a point of profound reflection on the role of human beings in creation and our relationship with God. Each theory about the tower, be it archaeological, historical or theological, offers a unique perspective on human nature and our relentless search for meaning, power, and understanding. And while the exact location and size of the tower may continue to be debated, the central lesson of the story of Babel remains clear. The quest for self-sufficiency, for boundless grandeur, can lead us to division, chaos, and destruction. True greatness, then, lies not in building a tower that takes us to heaven, but in building a deep understanding of our limitations and the beauty of the diversity that surrounds us. In an increasingly globalized world, the Tower of Babel continues to be a reminder that despite our differences, it is possible to find a path to unity and understanding. The challenge is to know how to communicate and collaborate, respecting the boundaries of diversity while recognizing that all towers built by humanity will eventually face the limits imposed by divine creation. The story of the Tower of Babel, with its powerful message about the limits of human ambition, continues to resonate deeply in the modern world. In an age marked by technological advancement, the relentless pursuit of power and control, and the exploration of the unknown, the lessons of Babel could not be more relevant. Today's world, with its gigantic megacities, its global corporations, and its attempts to overcome the barriers of nature and reality, reflects in many ways the same spirit of Babel, a desire to achieve the impossible, to surpass established limits, to build towers that touch the heavens. But, as the story of Babel teaches us, unbridled ambition can have disastrous consequences. One of the most obvious aspects of the connection between Babel and the modern world is the desire to centralize power and achieve greatness in an almost limitless way. In many parts of the world, we see a constant search for domination, be it economic, political, or technological. The race for natural resources, the exploration of space, the development of artificial intelligence, and the constant search for ways to control nature and even human life are clear examples of this spirit of Babel. Just as the builders of the tower wanted to rise to the heavens, modern societies also seek to surpass limits that were previously considered insurmountable. Human ambition, often without limits, is present in almost every sphere of modern life. Companies and governments compete to be the biggest, the most powerful, the most influential. We constantly seek more wealth, more power, more control. Global capitalism, with its huge corporations and its relentless pursuit of profit, can be seen as a reflection of the Tower of Babel, a system that tries to rise above natural limitations, without considering the spiritual, social, and environmental implications of this unbridled pursuit. Furthermore, the race for artificial intelligence and the desire to create machines that can surpass human intelligence is a clear example of the attempt to achieve a power that, in many ways, is divine. If, in Babel, human beings tried to build a tower that reached the sky, today we are building something equally ambitious, the attempt to create a form of intelligence that surpasses the limits of the human mind, with all the implications that this may have for ethics, freedom, and the very essence of what it means to be human. This desire to create something greater than ourselves is, in many ways, a reenactment of the spirit of Babel, the desire to surpass the limits imposed by nature and nurture. But the story of Babel also teaches us that ambition without humility and without regard for consequences can lead to ruin. When human beings try to act as if they were gods, disregarding natural and spiritual limitations, they end up creating chaos and destruction. The confusion of languages, which divided humanity and made communication impossible, is a clear symbol of this failure. When we do not respect the limits imposed by creation, we end up creating division, separation, and, eventually, failure. This is not only a theological lesson, but a practical lesson that can be observed in many aspects of contemporary society. The modern world, with its problems of political polarization, the growing disconnection between people, and the lack of effective communication between different cultures and groups, is a reflection of the confusion of the languages of Babel. Today, more than ever, we live in an era of great divisions, where the different cultural, political, and ideological languages become insurmountable walls. Just as the workers in the tower could no longer understand each other, we face immense difficulties in understanding each other. Social networks, which were created to connect people, often generate more confusion and fragmentation, with individuals isolating themselves in information bubbles that reinforce their own beliefs rather than fostering genuine dialogue. Therefore, the lessons of Babel for the modern world are clear. The pursuit of greatness without humility, the attempt to transcend natural and spiritual limits, can lead to destruction, confusion, and division. The story of Babel reminds us that when humanity places itself at the center, ignoring divine principles and the need for collaboration and harmony, it ends up moving away from its original purpose. The story of Babel, by showing us the dangers of arrogance and pride, also invites us to reflect on our own attitudes, to consider to what extent we are allowing ourselves to be carried away by the insatiable search for power and control. But perhaps the greatest lesson from Babel for the modern world is the importance of communication and collaboration. While the lack of mutual understanding led to failure and separation in the story of Babel, the ability to communicate and work together is essential to face the challenges of the contemporary world. Instead of building towers that separate us, we need to build bridges that connect us. We need to learn to listen to each other, to respect differences, and to work together to solve the global problems we face, be they environmental, social, or technological. Ultimately, the lesson of Babel for the modern world is that true greatness lies not in building a tower that takes us to the heavens, but in building a more just, more united, and more harmonious society. True greatness lies in learning to communicate, to collaborate, to respect differences, and to work for the common good, rather than seeking individual advancement or domination. The story of Babel, therefore, is not only a lesson in human hubris, but also a lesson in the importance of humility, empathy, and unity in times of global challenges. If we can learn to work together, respecting our differences, we can build a more balanced and prosperous future for all. It is important to remember that instead of building towers that separate us from each other, we must build bridges that connect and bring us closer together. The modern world, with all its advances and challenges, needs this lesson more than ever. If we are to avoid the confusion of tongues that still persists in our society, we need to learn to overcome our divisions and seek a deeper, more sincere, and more respectful understanding of one another. The story of the Tower of Babel, with its symbolic power and profound impact, leaves us with not only a narrative about the limits of human ambition, but also a warning that spans the ages. Reflecting on Babel leads us to question the very path that humanity has taken in its relentless pursuit of greatness and power. Over the centuries, the central message of this story has remained relevant, that, no matter how much we can achieve incredible feats and build great things, there are limits that we must not exceed. And these limits were not imposed to restrict us, but to protect us from our own arrogance and vanity. When we exceed these limits, we run the risk of losing ourselves, dividing ourselves, and even destroying ourselves. Babel, as we see, is not just a story of the confusion of languages, or of a huge tower left incomplete. It is a powerful metaphor for the human condition itself. It reflects the constant struggle between the desire for transcendence and the natural and spiritual limits that are imposed on us. In trying to build a tower that would reach the heavens, human beings were seeking something more than just a physical structure. They were trying to become like gods, controlling destiny and the universe. But God, in His wisdom, saw this as a fatal risk to humanity, and so He intervened, creating a confusion that separated people and prevented them from continuing with their boundless ambition. This divine intervention, which at first glance may seem like a severe punishment, is actually an act of mercy. God did not destroy the tower, but rather intervened in a way that allowed human beings the opportunity to learn and reflect. The confusion of languages was not just a way to stop the construction of a physical tower, but a way to stop the construction of an empire of pride and self-sufficiency. By scattering people across the world, God not only divided humanity, but also gave it the opportunity to reflect on its own limits, on the need for humility, and on the importance of collaboration and mutual respect. This moment of rupture, of confusion, can also be seen as the beginning of something new and vital: human diversity. With the multiplication of languages and cultures, humanity was brought into a new kind of relationship with the world and with each other. What began as an act of confusion and division was also God's way of enabling humanity to be richer, more complex, and more capable of learning from differences. The diversity that emerged from Babel need not be seen as a curse, but rather as a blessing, an opportunity to reflect God's greatness in varied and diverse ways. Today, in our globalized world, marked by diversity of cultures, languages, and perspectives, the story of Babel continues to challenge us. We are, in a sense, always trying to build towers, towers of success, of fame, of power, of control. But the lessons of Babel remind us that true greatness comes not from building towers to elevate ourselves, but from building bridges that connect us. What we have to learn from Babel is that instead of trying to reach the sky through selfish ambition, we should seek ways to reach out to one another, overcome the barriers of misunderstanding, and respect the differences that exist between us. In our personal lives, we also often find ourselves trying to build our own towers. We may have big dreams and goals, and often these goals are legitimate. But are we building our towers with humility? Are we aware of the limits that life imposes on us, or are we blinded by our own ambition? The story of Babel challenges us to reflect on this. When we seek something great, are we doing it for our own benefit or for the good of all? Are we building for ourselves, or are we building bridges that connect others and bring us closer to God? The final reflection on Babel is about what we are really seeking in our lives. When we look at great human achievements, are we truly creating something that elevates humanity, or are we simply seeking personal glory, fame, and power? In a world full of divisions, the real question we must ask ourselves is, are we building towers that separate us, or are we building bridges that unite us? What about you? Are you building a tower or a bridge? Are you seeking success and greatness through arrogance and selfishness, or are you working to create something that benefits everyone? The choices we make regarding our goals, our way of relating to others, and our worldview can determine whether we are following the example of Babel or creating something more lasting and meaningful. The story of Babel is an invitation to look at our own actions and reflections, to question our motivations, and to ask ourselves what we are really trying to achieve. It calls us to live humbly, to respect boundaries, to seek the common good, and to learn to listen to others. For, as the story of Babel teaches us, true greatness comes not from building towers that separate us, but from building bridges that unite us. In the end, what we should learn from Babel is not just about the failure of one tower, but about the importance of a wiser, more humane path. By building bridges rather than towers, we can find a path to true greatness. This is the legacy Babel leaves us, a timeless lesson about humility, respect, and the true greatness that comes from connecting with others in genuine and constructive ways. Thank you for joining us on this journey of reflection. If you found value in this message, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and turn on the notification bell so we can continue exploring together the lessons that history has to teach us. Until the next video, where we will continue exploring deep and transformative themes.